The dining room of an upscale restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation and the clink of crystal glasses. At one corner table sat a millionaire, dressed in designer clothes and dripping with self-importance. When the server approached to take his order, the man leaned back in his chair, looked him up and down, and sneered. "Know your place," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The room went still. The server only smiled politely, not revealing what no one else at the table knew. This wasn't just any employee. His family owned the entire restaurant chain. And by the end of the night, the millionaire would learn that the place he thought he owned with money wasn't his at all. The restaurant was the crown jewel of the city's dining scene. Polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of chandeliers, and the air carried a mix of rosemary, butter, and seared meats from the kitchen. Guests spoke in hushed tones, their conversations punctuated by laughter and the occasional clink of a wine bottle being uncorked. For most of the staff, working here was a dream. The clientele tipped well, the kitchen ran like clockwork, and the management treated employees with respect. But for Daniel, the young black man tying his apron and straightening his notepad, this job was more than a paycheck. Daniel's family owned the restaurant, along with dozens more across the country. His parents had built the chain from a single small diner into a thriving empire known for its hospitality and excellence. But Daniel wasn't the type to coast on a family name. His parents had made it clear. If he wanted to eventually help run the business, he needed to understand it from the ground up. That meant bussing tables, pouring water, taking orders, and seeing firsthand what it meant to serve people well. Most nights, Daniel enjoyed the anonymity. Guests saw only a polite server in a crisp uniform, not the heir to a multi-million-dollar empire. He liked it that way. He liked earning respect quietly, without anyone knowing who he really was. But not everyone gave respect. That evening, a man named Gregory Walsh walked in with the kind of presence that demanded attention. Mid-50s, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, and carrying himself with the smugness of someone used to being the loudest voice in the room, Gregory was impossible to ignore. He swept through the dining area with his small entourage trailing behind him, barking at the hostess to seat him at the best table. When he reached his seat, he leaned back as if he owned the place, stretching his arms across the chair next to him, his voice carrying above the low hum of the restaurant. "Finally," he said, "a place in this city that looks like it understands quality." Daniel approached with his usual calm demeanor. "Good evening. My name is Daniel, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you off with some drinks?" Gregory glanced up at him, his eyes narrowing. His lips curled into a faint smirk. "You? Well, I suppose you'll do. Bring me your best red wine, and don't take too long. I know how it can be with staff." The people at his table chuckled politely, though their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Daniel only nodded, jotting the note and moving on. He had heard worse. When he returned with the bottle, presented it with care, and poured with steady hands, Gregory didn't offer thanks. Instead, he muttered, "At least you've had some training. Surprising, really." Daniel gave a small smile and stepped back, letting the man enjoy his drink. But as the night went on, Gregory's arrogance only grew. He bragged loudly about his wealth, telling stories of deals he had closed, of expensive vacations and cars he had purchased. He name-dropped politicians and CEOs as if they were old friends. "Money," he said at one point, holding his glass high, "is what separates us from everyone else. Some people serve it, some people spend it." His eyes flicked briefly to Daniel, lingering just long enough for the insult to land. The table laughed awkwardly. Nearby diners exchanged glances. The staff, used to catering to wealthy egos, moved carefully, but they couldn't hide the stiffness in their shoulders when Gregory spoke. Through it all, Daniel stayed composed. He refilled glasses, cleared plates, and answered questions about the menu with the same calm tone he gave to every guest. But inside he felt a slow burn. Not anger. He had learned long ago not to give people like Gregory that power, but a steady resolve. When the entrees were served, Gregory leaned back in his chair, eyeing Daniel as if he were a curiosity rather than a person. "Tell me something," he said loudly, loud enough for half the room to hear. "How long have you been doing this? Serving? Carrying plates? Cleaning up after people who actually made something of themselves?" Daniel set a steak plate gently in front of one of the guests before answering. "I've been here long enough to understand the importance of good service, sir." Gregory chuckled. "Good answer. You know your place, at least." The words dropped like stones into water. The table fell silent. Other diners shifted uncomfortably, some whispering behind their napkins. The staff standing near the edge of the room stiffened, their jaws tightening. They knew the truth, Gregory didn't. Daniel's place wasn't at the bottom. His place was at the top, one he had earned through patience, work, and a level of class Gregory would never understand. But Daniel didn't flinch. He smiled politely, nodded, and stepped back. Inside, though, he knew the time for silence was drawing to an end. Gregory Walsh had no idea who he was talking to, and before the night was over, he would learn. Gregory's words still hung in the air when Daniel stepped away from the table. The millionaire didn't notice the tension he had created. In fact, he seemed to thrive on it. He smirked, cut into his steak, and launched into another story about his yacht on the coast. For the rest of the staff, though, the moment was heavy. A hostess passing by glanced at Daniel, her eyes flashing with both sympathy and respect. The bartender, wiping glasses near the service station, muttered under his breath, "If only he knew." But Daniel didn't need their pity. He had been trained for moments like this, trained by life, by his family, by years of dealing with people who thought wealth gave them license to belittle others. He knew arrogance was often its own punishment. Still, Gregory wasn't done. As Daniel returned with a tray of side dishes, Gregory leaned back in his chair and made a show of waving him over. "You're moving a little slow there, champ," he said, his tone sharp with mockery. "Hope you're not expecting a big tip tonight. My money goes to people who earn it." Daniel placed the tray down carefully, his movements precise and unhurried. "Of course, sir," he replied evenly. One of Gregory's companions, a woman with a diamond necklace glittering at her throat, shifted uncomfortably. "Gregory," she murmured, "maybe ease up a little. The service has been excellent." Gregory waved her off with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Please, I call it how I see it. If people can't handle a little honesty, they shouldn't be in this line of work." He turned back to Daniel, his eyes narrowing. "Tell me, do you like this job? Carrying plates? Smiling at people like me all night? Or is this just something you do until... what? You figure out what else you can handle?" Daniel kept his gaze steady. "I like learning, sir. Every job teaches you something." Gregory barked a laugh. "Learning? Ha! The only thing you'll learn here is that the world needs people like me on top, and people like you to serve." The words landed like a slap. The table went silent again, and even the nearby diners stopped pretending not to listen. A man at the next table set down his fork with a clatter, glaring openly at Gregory. But Daniel didn't react. He placed another dish, adjusted a wine glass, and stepped back with the same calm professionalism as always. The thing about Gregory was that he thrived on reaction. He wanted anger, wanted someone to snap back so he could play the victim or double down on his superiority. When he didn't get that from Daniel, he grew more restless, more determined to provoke. Half an hour later, as dessert menus were being handed out, Gregory struck again. "Tell me," he said loudly, "what's the craziest thing anyone's ever asked you to do? Shine their shoes? Fetch their car? Or do you draw the line at carrying bags?" Daniel's voice was smooth as glass. "I'm here to make sure your dining experience is as enjoyable as possible, sir. That's all." Gregory chuckled, shaking his head. "Good answer again. You really do know your place." "That's rare these days." His companions shifted uncomfortably. One man cleared his throat, muttering something about the quality of the steak. Another woman tried to change the subject, asking about the wine list. But Gregory ignored them, basking in his own cruelty. By now the staff had noticed. The manager, a middle-aged man named Luis who had worked with the family for decades, hovered at the edge of the dining room, his jaw tight. Twice he started forward to intervene, but Daniel gave him a small shake of the head. Not yet, because Daniel understood something Gregory never would: patience. He knew timing was everything, and he knew that revealing the truth too early would let Gregory brush it off as a misunderstanding. But if he waited, if he allowed the man to dig his own hole deeper and deeper, the reveal would carry the weight it needed. Dessert arrived. A delicate chocolate soufflé, perfectly risen. Daniel set it gently before Gregory, who looked at it with a mixture of disdain and suspicion. Hope this isn't one of those overpriced fluff desserts. Guess we'll see if you got it right." He dug in, chewed thoughtfully, then sneered. "Not bad. You didn't mess this up." "Shocking, really." The staff exchanged looks. One of the junior servers muttered under her breath, "If he only knew who baked that soufflé recipe." It was Daniel's grandmother's recipe, the same one that had earned the restaurant chain its reputation decades ago. But Gregory, oblivious, leaned back and delivered the line that would cement the night. "Honestly, you people should be grateful. Serving men like me is probably the closest you'll ever get to real success." The restaurant froze. Every eye turned toward the table. Guests shifted in their chairs, some whispering angrily, others simply stunned at the audacity. Daniel straightened, his hands resting lightly on the tray at his side. He gave a small nod, as if confirming to himself that the moment had come. He wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. He had something far more powerful than anger, the truth. And in a matter of minutes, Gregory Walsh was going to hear it. The souffle plates had just been cleared when Gregory called out again, snapping his fingers as if Daniel were a bellhop instead of a server. "Hey you, coffee, black, and don't take all night about it," he said, his voice echoing across the dining room. A ripple of disapproval passed through the other tables. Some guests openly frowned, others whispered into their hands. Gregory, however, was oblivious. He leaned back in his chair, smugness painted across his face, certain that the evening was playing out exactly as it should. Him in control, everyone else beneath him. Daniel returned with a small silver tray, setting down the coffee with the same calm precision he'd shown all evening. He placed the cup, laid the spoon gently beside it, and stepped back. Gregory picked up the cup and took a slow sip, smacking his lips. Then he glanced up at Daniel, his smirk deepening. "See? Not so hard. This is what you were made for, serving men like me. If you're smart, you'll keep your head down and be grateful for it." The line broke the dam. Murmurs filled the room. One man at a nearby table muttered, "Unbelievable." A woman across the room shook her head in disgust. Even Gregory's own companions looked away, clearly embarrassed by his behavior. Daniel let the silence hang for a moment, his eyes steady on Gregory. Then, for the first time that evening, he allowed himself a small smile. "Genuine? Calm, unshaken, sir," he said evenly. "I think there's something you should know." Gregory raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh? Going to give me a lecture about respect? Save it. I don't take advice from people in aprons." But Daniel didn't flinch. He slipped the notepad into his pocket, folded his hands in front of him, and spoke in a clear, steady voice that carried through the dining room. "My family owns this restaurant. In fact, we own the entire chain. I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to understand every part of the business we've built. From washing dishes to serving tables, I've done it all. Tonight, I happen to be serving you." The dining room went silent, utterly silent. Gregory blinked, then let out a short, mocking laugh. "What? That's rich. You? Owning this place? Please." He turned to his companions, waiting for them to join in the laughter. But they didn't. Their eyes were fixed on Daniel, wide and cautious. Daniel continued, unshaken. "My grandparents started with a small diner downtown 50 years ago. My parents grew it into what you see today, 37 locations across the country. I'll be taking over someday, but not before I've worked every job myself. That's what my family believes. You can't lead if you don't understand what it means to serve." Gasps rippled through the room. Diners exchanged looks, whispers rising like sparks. One man near the bar murmured, "He's telling the truth. I read about this family in the business section last year." Gregory's smirk faltered. He set his cup down too quickly, sloshing coffee onto the saucer. "You expect me to believe—" But Daniel didn't let him finish. His voice stayed calm, but it carried a weight that cut through the room. "While you were telling me to know my place, you were sitting in mine. This restaurant? This chair, this table, this meal? You've been dining in my family's house all night. And you've spent the evening trying to convince yourself that wealth makes you superior. But wealth without respect, sir, is nothing more than a number on paper." A stunned silence followed. Then, slowly, clapping started at one of the nearby tables. A couple stood and applauded, followed by another guest, then another. Soon, half the dining room was on its feet, not cheering loudly, but offering quiet, deliberate applause. Gregory's face turned crimson. He glanced around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back him up. His companions avoided his eyes, shifting in their chairs. The man to his right muttered, "Gregory, maybe we should just go." But Gregory wasn't ready to give in. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Some waiter thinks he's—" Luis, the manager, stepped forward then. His voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Walsh, Daniel is telling the truth. His family owns this chain. Every location, including this one. You've been insulting the owner's son all night. That sealed it." Whatever thread of denial Gregory was clinging to snapped in an instant. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and sank back into his chair, suddenly looking very small in the glow of the chandeliers. Daniel inclined his head politely, the same calm smile still on his face. "Your coffee, sir, is on the house. Consider it a courtesy." And with that, he turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving Gregory to stew in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The applause followed him, soft but steady, until the doors swung shut behind him. For a long moment, Gregory sat frozen in his chair. His jaw worked soundlessly, as if the words he wanted to say had all turned to ash on his tongue. The chatter that usually filled the restaurant had shifted into a new rhythm, A quiet hum of whispers, a rustle of movement, and the occasional soft laugh from diners who couldn't quite hide their delight at watching a man so arrogant brought low. Finally, Gregory found his voice. He forced a laugh, brittle and sharp, the sound bouncing awkwardly around the table. "All right, very funny," he said, glancing at his companions. "Clearly this is some kind of prank. You all must have cooked this up to get a laugh at my expense." No one laughed with him. His companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats, staring down at their plates or fiddling with their napkins. The woman with the diamond necklace cleared her throat and said softly, "Gregory, I don't think he was joking." Gregory's face flushed deeper. "Oh, come on. You really expect me to believe that this kid owns this place? Please, look at him. He's a waiter." At that moment, Luis the manager returned to the table, his expression calm but firm. "Mr. Walsh," Daniel wasn't exaggerating. "He is the son of the owners. His family built this chain from the ground up. Many of us who work here have been with them for decades. This restaurant is their legacy, and Daniel is part of that legacy." The murmur around the room swelled, diners leaning closer to one another, recounting the insults Gregory had hurled all evening. One man at a nearby table spoke louder than intended. All night he was talking about money and respect, and he couldn't even recognize the owner's son standing in front of him. Laughter followed, quick and cutting. Gregory's lips pressed into a thin line. He turned to Daniel, who had paused just outside the kitchen doors, watching calmly. "Listen," Gregory said, his tone shifting suddenly, oily and forced. "I didn't mean any offense. You know how it is. I just like to joke around. Nothing personal." Daniel's smile didn't waver. "I don't take it personally, sir. But words have weight, especially when spoken loudly enough for others to hear." Gregory's hands twitched against the tablecloth. He was used to being the loudest, the strongest, the richest in the room. But now, no amount of money could shield him from the eyes watching, the whispers circling, the humiliation mounting. One of his companions finally spoke, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Gregory, maybe we should just leave. You've said enough tonight." But Gregory wasn't ready to surrender. He jabbed a finger toward Daniel. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Playing the humble server while your family sits on a fortune. If you really owned this place, you wouldn't be carrying plates. You'd be in some office, counting money." Daniel tilted his head slightly, his voice calm as ever. "And that's the difference between us. You measure success by how much distance you can put between yourself and the people who serve you. My family measures success by how well we serve others. That's why we're still here after 50 years. That's why this business keeps growing. Respect doesn't trickle down from money, it rises from dignity." The applause that followed was louder this time, more confident, and it spread quickly through the restaurant. Diners clapped openly, some even whistling. The sound filled the space, drowning out Gregory's sputtering protests. His companions rose quietly, one by one, unwilling to endure the humiliation any longer. The woman with the necklace murmured something about calling a driver, her eyes avoiding Gregory's. Within moments, he was alone at the table, abandoned even by those who had come in with him. The color drained from his face as he realized the full weight of what had just happened. He had strutted into the restaurant expecting to be admired, to dominate the evening with his arrogance. Instead, he had become the evening's entertainment, the cautionary tale everyone would recount tomorrow over brunch. Luis stepped closer, his tone courteous but unyielding. "Mr. Walsh, I think it would be best if you settled your bill and left for the evening." Gregory sputtered. "Bill? You can't be serious after this treatment? After this insult?" But Luis only raised an eyebrow. "The insult, sir, was not ours. The bill is waiting at the front." A low ripple of laughter followed. Gregory shoved back his chair, the legs screeching against the polished floor. He slapped a handful of bills onto the table, far more than the meal cost, though it was clear the gesture was less about generosity and more about escaping quickly. Then, without meeting anyone's eyes, he stormed toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As the doors swung shut behind him, the restaurant seemed to exhale. Conversations resumed, though now lighter, tinged with humor. Guests raised their glasses to Daniel when he passed, some even stopping him to shake his hand. One older gentleman near the bar caught his eye. "Your parents raised you right," he said warmly. "Handled that better than most would have." Daniel only nodded, his smile modest. "Thank you, sir. We believe respect is always the right answer, even when it isn't given." And with that, he slipped back into the rhythm of the evening, serving with the same calm, quiet dignity as before. But everyone in the restaurant knew the truth now. The man they had watched endure insult after insult wasn't just a server. He was the future of the restaurant they loved. And Gregory Walsh? He had walked in as a man trying to prove his superiority. He had walked out as a man remembered only for his humiliation. News of the dinner spread quickly through the city's elite circles. Guests who had been there couldn't resist retelling the story. How Gregory Walsh, a millionaire known for his arrogance, had tried to belittle a black server, only to discover that the server was the heir to the entire restaurant chain. By the end of the week, Gregory's name was being whispered in country clubs and boardrooms, not with admiration, but with mockery. His cruel words had turned him into a punchline. The more he tried to deny what had happened, the more people leaned into the story. No one pitied him. They had all seen the truth with their own eyes. His wealth couldn't hide his lack of dignity. The restaurant, meanwhile, gained even more respect. Regular patrons praised its culture, admiring how Daniel had handled himself with grace in the face of open insult. Bookings soared, and for weeks afterward, diners would ask quietly if the owner's son was on the floor that night. Daniel's family was proud, not just of his composure, but of the lesson he had reinforced. True leadership comes from understanding people, not towering above them. As for Daniel, he slipped back into his work without fuss. He wasn't looking for applause. For him, the night was just another lesson in patience, another reminder that arrogance always collapses under its own weight. Gregory Walsh had strutted in expecting to be admired. He left as a cautionary tale, and Daniel, calm, dignified, unshaken, proved that knowing your place doesn't mean standing beneath anyone. Sometimes, it means standing taller, with your dignity intact, while arrogance crumbles at your feet.